I can't see. Ahoy game makers, today I wanted to talk about finishing things and when this moment first hit me. So I was making Super Space Slayer 1 when I still worked at a games company as a tester, and I've been working on the game a couple of months. Things were going fine, I guess. I was chipping away. I'll show some footage of the game. Bring it up, Ken. But, and then one of my friends just asked me, well, this is all very well, Ken, but when is this game gonna be finished? And I thought, yikes, like, yeah, that's a good point, because historically I made a whole bunch of Click Team Fusion games that I wasn't really satisfied with, or hadn't finished. Well, I'd also finished some things, but whatever. I had a big history of a bunch of Click Team Fusion things that weren't really what I wanted in a way, and so the threat of not finishing this was there, like that was a meaningful threat. So it was then, I just took what he had to say and thought, gosh darn it, I'm gonna finish this. This game has to be on a collision course with ending. Just because the game was on a collision course with ending, though, didn't mean it was going to end quickly necessarily. It still took me a few more months to finish Super Space Slayer 1. I'm sure it took even longer to make Super Space Slayer 2. All that stuff's kind of a blur at this point. But the idea is basically, whether it's long-term or short-term, you need to resolve that this is going to end. And I think that applies on a smaller scale as well. You can make yourself a list of things and say, right, they've got a list of like 10 bugs here, even if I find more bugs. When I start working on a bug, I'm going to kill the bugs, and the bugs are going to end. So somehow that's all it took. I think I remember that as a real turning point for me, just because resolving to actually finish in practice was important, because that's all it took. Even now that I'm working on Super Space Galaxy, which has taken years already, I don't think it's going to take that many more years to have a real 1.0, but, you know, it's taken years. But at the same time, just because it's taken years doesn't mean that it's not on that same collision course with ending. I wouldn't bet against me at this point, because the fourth demo is out, there is something you can play, a fifth demo is honestly on the way in the next couple of weeks. At this point, I wouldn't bet against me, basically, because I know that eventually the game has to be genuinely released in practice. And releasing things in practice can be kind of daunting, because when you're working on them, it's fun and you feel like you've got this limitless potential of, oh, the game's going to be awesome later, and my ideas are so good, and it can be kind of depressing to find out that you release the game and maybe it's a bit underwhelming, or maybe no one pays attention to it at all, and nothing much happens. And so actually releasing stuff in practice can be daunting for all sorts of reasons compared to just working on it quietly, or not working on it and just dreaming about it. One thing that might be holding you back is feeling like you don't have enough time to work on the game, and I think most of the time that's not true. As Arnold says, you have time, you make the time. And if you take a real account of what you're doing with your time, quite often you're not really doing that much. Quite often I've talked about this in a previous video, about like time management and how we perceive we use our time versus how we really do. But I think if you take a real account of where your time is going, there is probably time to work in your indie game unless you have something really wacky going on. And the other thing about getting started and resolving to finish as well is that it doesn't necessarily have to be some grand thing. I've got people in the Discord server now who are sharing little bits and pieces they've implemented. I've shared things like, oh, I put a shield graphic around your ship now when it's got shields and stuff like that. It doesn't have to be grand, and these little things, if they're thoroughly implemented, they start to add up to people playing a game and thinking, oh, this is pretty slick, this is pretty good. So just making a small mundane list of things you can do over the week and actually doing them really adds up, and you'll be shocked when you look back after a few months or even a few years at how all these things come together. Another thing I've noticed is that some people like to flit around from kind of demo to demo, and I've been tempted many times to leave Super Space Galaxy for a bit and make something else, but it's almost never happened. And the thought there would just be like, I've put lots of work into this one game, I already have a game, I've already started, I'm done starting, now it's time to continue. And that's another thing maybe, it's the glamour of starting. Like, starting a new project seems kind of exciting, but it's all a bit of a fallacy, really, because surely the excitement of starting is based on the idea of the excitement of finishing and what's going to happen when the project's done. So really you have to commit to continuing and finishing to really fulfill that excitement of starting in the first place. So you could say the effort you're likely to put into lots of little scattered demos might as well be put into one game that gets finished anyway, because I think I've seen people say that even. They've worked in a bunch of different little things, then they find, oh, actually I've spent years kind of knocking around from project to project, and I could have put it all into one coherent project, but I didn't, and yeah, so don't let that waste happen to you. If you're doing a bunch of little different things, there's no reason you couldn't learn things that are all part of a greater whole there if you pull your ideas together. I'm also kind of obsessed with the Eisenhower Matrix ever since I heard it. For those of you who haven't heard about the Eisenhower Matrix, it's this thing about urgent versus important, basically, and there's a lot you could say about that. We could probably have a whole separate video on that, but for now, all I want to say is that a lot of people are stuck in this cycle of working on what's urgent, and then as soon as what's urgent is done, they just kind of settle back down and don't do much, and then they spring into action again only when some urgency rears its head. And the way to get off this merry-go-round, I'm all about breaking the cycle over here, and the way to get off this merry-go-round is to think about what's actually important to you, and the Eisenhower Matrix says to schedule time for these important but not urgent things, and I don't think that's right. So just schedule some time in the evening or on the weekend to work on what's really important. And the other twist is that if you don't know what's important to you, you can't work on the important stuff, and you're likely to just knock around doing whatever.
You drift around and you never end up anywhere.
I also think it helps to think of your future self. Like, I actually put notes in my calendar into the future sometimes. If I've thought of the future, I actually put a note like 6 months from now, like 6 months ago you were thinking of the future, what happened? And it just holds you a bit more accountable about the narrative there. Maybe there's such a thing as like relative later and absolute later, if you know what I mean. So yeah, if you're thinking of your future self 1 year from now, and you can't think of a principled reason why you would have made more of your game then than you have now, if you're just kind of thinking, oh, well, maybe something will come up later. If there's no principled reason why something would come up later, then it's probably not going to come up. You probably just need to do it this weekend, at least. Another cause of dread, I think, can be just that games take a long time to make, and yes, they do. Super Space Galaxy has taken years. But at the same time, one of my favourite lines about this is just, the time will pass anyway. So that's kind of the question, really. Would you like to be a few years older and with your game made, or would you like to be a few years older and not have your game made? Because you're probably going to be a few years older either way. If you want to take action on your game, come join me in the Discord server, where other indie devs are building things and releasing updates about them, or book a call with me and I can probably pull your ideas together, even if they're just a bunch of different disorganized ideas. It's been done, it is known, and let's get you on the path to being the game maker you always wanted to be.